All right, everyone. I'd like to thank Danute Debney Shaw, the author of How the Tin Man Found His Brain, for joining us tonight. And I'll hand it over to her.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And thank you, the Santa Fe Library, for hosting this and giving me the opportunity to do this presentation. I think what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about what I do and why I do it. And before we go on, I just want to mention, Frank, I am seeing the gallery. So I'm not sure why, but I wasn't going to be seeing the gallery. I think we wanted that not to be part of the view for this recording. Are you there, Frank? Frank, Adam, Frank, Adam.
Danute, it won't go away from the top there.
Oh, okay. All right. As long as that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't compromise our
As long as
recording.
the big picture is you, then you're on speaker view.
Well, the big picture isn't me. It's just a little picture. I have a little thumbnail picture here of myself, but that's okay. I don't need to see myself. Let me get this started. I'll talk a little bit about my background. First of all, I am Danute Debney Shaw, as Adam had mentioned, and I am the owner and the chief consultant for Silafantis, which is a consulting service providing training, seminars, and workshops on decision strategy innovation. If you see me looking off to the right a little bit now and then, that's where I've got my outline. I didn't want to shuffle a lot of papers in front of me, so my outline is over to the right, and I can keep myself on track so I don't run over time. We hope to take about 45 minutes, maybe not quite an hour, to be able to go through this presentation. So as I was saying, my work is in the area of decision strategy innovation. My background is in many areas, actually. One door would open, another would close, a window would open, another window would close. And I was moved along in life in a variety of rather diverse and interesting ways. And all of this experience helped to provide a very broad spectrum background for me and a broad spectrum understanding of the kinds of challenges, the kinds of difficulties that people go through in their personal lives and in their professional lives as well. I began my career working in New York for a broadcasting company for several years. And after that, I worked in the area as a freelance associate producer and also as a performer. And I have to tell you, there's no better background learning both humility and the power of risk, unless you've decided to explore acting. That was a very, very interesting phase to my life. I ended up moving toward the West and went to law school. I was in Southern California and Los Angeles, and while I was in law school, I worked for a homeless health and human services organization. And that was a very, very rich experience. I got to see people having the most amazing challenges in their life, and how they got through them, how they overcame them or didn't overcome them. Was a very, very rich experience. And I didn't really even know that this is what was going to happen. I sort of fell into that opportunity. I provided a service for them in putting together their quarterly reports. So I got to see what the recidivism was, what the various successes and not so successful issues were with the business. With that particular, it wasn't a business, it was a nonprofit organization, but they had to report their statistics in order to receive their funding. And it was a very, very rich experience for me. After that, I ended up working in San Francisco for an aviation organization. I got to do international negotiations, meaning that I worked domestically with contracts here in the United States, but also with entities that were in different countries. And that gave me the opportunity to work with people on their turf and from their cultural perspective. That gave me a richness of experience in a variety of cultures and approaches. There is a bit in my book that talks about how different countries, different cultures who have a different perspective on expression and communication, how they perceive and receive information, and how they interact and do negotiations. And that was a very, very wonderful experience. And after that, I ended up coming to Washington, D.C. and worked for a number of years as a contract attorney and also for a boutique financial services law firm, which handled a lot of the issues that took place during the 2008 mortgage lending crisis. That was another one of those instances where I was thrown into a situation and given an opportunity to learn a great deal about a circumstance that I otherwise would not have had this kind of inside knowledge of and information. I worked on a lot of government investigations as well as a contract attorney, and did quite a bit of other work as well. And after that, I ended up coming out here to New Mexico, which is where I'm sitting right now. I still maintain contact and do work in other areas and in other states and with folks all over. But I am essentially at home here in New Mexico. And now we're in a virtual world anyway, so we can work from just about anywhere if we get a handle on Zoom, which is now becoming a kind of way of life, whether we like it or not. I personally love to be more in front of the audience and with the group and working with the people one-on-one, but now we're all going to have to adapt, and I'm going to adapt right along with everyone else. So that's a little bit about my background, and the professionally, my experiences were able to evolve my sense of understanding. I think that's the richest central gain, if you will, that I had from all of this. It really enlarged my understanding. As a friend of mine said the other day, I had no idea that people who waited on tables don't really make that much money. She had just never realized that they make most of their money from tips. So here's an example of a day-to-day experience that someone has and just really has never thought to inquire or learn about, you know, what's really going on in this situation. And with all of the work that I've done and in the various capacities and the various places with various groups of people have given me the backdrop for the work that I'm doing now. When I engaged in all of these different vocations and avocations and work efforts, I was always very mindful of applying the same thing I'm doing now. I always worked from my own paradigm of decision, strategy, innovation. All of my thought and process development, everything that I encouraged in others that I worked with and for, was in alignment with what I'm now doing out on my own with my work through Sila Fontes. So the people that I worked with and endeavored to support, it was very interesting. Another insight that came from all of this is the most successful people that I've met in whatever position they were in their personal lives or in their professional roles, the ones who incorporated a more fulsome approach to their thinking, to the way they made their decisions, to the way they identified their choices, how they looked at the issues that faced and confronted them. These were the people who were the most successful. They did it in different ways. They had their own styles. Some were more sporadic about it. Some actually had a strong approach to how they engaged challenges and opportunities in their life. And this, again, was another amazing insight for me. Before I launch into this discussion on the book, I want to mention a couple of things. Those of you who signed up through the library website or who received an email initially would have seen a picture of me sitting at a desk. And I wanted to speak to that picture because that is actually an application that's going to go live in May, possibly August of this year. It's in post-production now. I'm a content provider for that application. I bring it up because it's an application that deals with lifestyle and well-being, so that people can gain a lot of different information in one location. They're going to have something between 14 to 18 different content providers speaking on a number of different issues, including training animals, training pets. I mention that because I have friends out there who have pets who might want to have some training. And so it's going to be exciting, quite exciting. And I'm very delighted to be a contributor. I'm just one of the contributors, and I mention it. It's called myHealthyYou. myHealthyYou. If you have any interest, you can look it up. They have a website on the internet. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. I also wanted to give a shout out to my friend Angel Britt, who is from England and is currently a very successful photographer in the area of San Diego and Oceanside. She does business photography as well as family photography, and she's responsible for the little tin man that you're seeing as my mascot here in the video. He's not there for promotion or anything, but he's a wonderful little shot she sent me for a bit of humor, and I love having my little mascot there. So that's my friend that I have to thank. And lastly, I want to say that if anyone has any questions, and we don't really have time in this presentation to engage all those questions, you can feel free to contact me. I was going to do a little sign under my face here that had the email, but you can see the Cielefantis name behind me, and it's just info@Cielefantis. info@Cielefantis. So any questions, thoughts, communication, I'm delighted to respond. Always happy to hear from people. So that's kind of the business that I wanted to get out of the way before I launch into the book itself. So how and why did I write Tin Man? It's a collection of essays and commentaries. Some of them I've had for some time. Others I wrote specifically for the book. There is no actual arc that you would have often in a book where there's a beginning, there's some issues that are brought up, there's some ways of dealing with the issues, and then there's some conclusions which bring out solutions. Each chapter is very short, and each chapter addresses a piece of a number of different aspects of this puzzle. The puzzle being decision, strategy, innovation. How do we make our choices? How do we make our choices count? How do our choices build successes in our lives, build ultimate resilience, and build a way forward through all the challenges that we have to undertake? And we have many, left, right, and center. I think we always have here in the world. And nowadays there seem to just be more of them, and the world has gotten smaller, in some ways more complex. So as a backdrop regarding my own journey and how I got to do this, the idea was to be able to support people through their own progress of challenges. And that's part of why the book is written, because there are many people who are actively looking for tools, looking for ideas, looking for approaches. And I'm not trying to say that the approaches I offer are the only ones out there, or that they've never been mentioned before, but they are coming from my perspective, from my own organic growth and experience over time. And through my own filter of background. And that's why I summarize them in many of the chapters. I'll say things like thoughts to consider, and it'll be a little summary list of points that were brought up in each given chapter. So one of the reasons I'm doing the book is it is a backdrop for my journey. The other reason is that it is hopefully a help and a support to those who may be engaging challenges in their lives at this time. And thirdly, and possibly most importantly, I really wanted people to be able to have something that they could sort of chew on a little, gnaw on a little. So I actually welcome a differing opinion. People do not have to feel that they must agree with everything that I'm saying. It's okay to disagree. They're just ideas and points of interest to stimulate thinking and to spur exploration and investigation. So I picked the Tin Man metaphor. That's another question people ask me about a lot. Why the Tin Man? Well, if we stop to think about it, the Tin Man was a wonderful soul, is a wonderful soul, because he is immortal in the movies and in the books that have been written about the Wizard of Oz. He was always a wonderful, affectionate, loving, caring soul, but he felt that he was missing something. He felt he was missing his heart. And everything he did, as we watch his journey through the movies and the books, everything he did was so heartfelt and so considerate and so intelligent. And he always had a wonderful heart-brain connection going on, always had that, but he felt he needed that external validation, that external gift. He wanted to see the wizard who could give him a heart. And as we all know, he got a little watch, which represented a heart. And he felt delighted by that, because now he felt he had the heart that he was always missing, when in reality, he was not missing anything at all. And we, in our own ways, are like that. We have so much of what we need within ourselves in order to be able to work our way through life, work our way through the challenges, enjoy the fun of it, enjoy the opportunities of it, maximize our experiences. We have all that. In fact, it's funny because I often listen to people talk about mankind and have these philosophical discussions and what's really important for humanity and what humanity considers very important. And one thing, well, a couple of things. First of all, we humans like to have all the answers. We like to feel we have all the answers. We really don't like living in the question. We like living in the answers. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, and that's not actually possible a lot of the time, because there's so much we don't know everything about yet. The other thing is that We like to feel we're in control. We like to feel that we're on top of it. We like to feel we're in the right. We've made the right decision, whatever it was, just because we've made it. We're on it. And that's possible sometimes. Absolutely. Absolutely. But there are so many things that we can't really control in our lives that way. But we can have the power of response. And it is my belief, and the belief that is expressed in this book, that our greatest power is our power of choice and decision making. And I do, later on, I'll talk about it a little bit. I do go into some stories of people who have overcome all sorts of situations, work their way through all sorts of situations, through the power of deciding how to address them, how to respond to them. Do we become vanquished by whatever is happening, by the meanness of others, by the pain of a situation, by the pain of a loss? Or do we decide that we're not going to pay an additional price for whatever has been done, let's say, to us? If there have been circumstances where we've lost jobs, or we've lost family members, or we've lost loved ones, all of that is a part of our lives day in and day out. And yet we have a zillion choices to make. People raising children make choices constantly, and often constantly are concerned about what kind of choices they're making, and what kind of impact that's really having on their family. So this book is divided into several parts. There are 4 parts. The first one is a discussion on where it all begins for us, that level of awareness, the potentials of our internal world. And for these, because that's where our biggest real resources lie, as I've pointed out. And there's a story about a man. I'm going to tell you the story right now. It's in my introduction before I actually get into the first part. I talk about a gentleman who I had a consultation with, and he owned a regional business. And he was one of those hard hitting kinds of guys, sort of a tough fellow and tough negotiator, and very responsible for a lot of people in a lot of, I think it was a privately held company. I don't think that this was a publicly held company. I think he and his family owned this company, and there was a tremendous responsibility that went with it. Well, he had decided that his organization needed to have one of those get together and work together and create new bonds and new friendships and new approaches. So he hired, an organization that booked him on a 4-day sort of, I don't know exactly, kind of fellowship meeting where they were going to have all of the major management people from the various offices coming and working together and having experiences together and talking about how to enhance management, et cetera, et cetera. But most of what was going to be presented was from a tactical perspective on how to maximize your approaches in working together with each other. It was not a sort of touchy-feely type of program. And he was very, very angry because there was a Qigong master scheduled into all of this. And he had no idea why on earth would there be a Qigong master? Who booked this Qigong master? And he's one of those people who kind of relives his rage and annoyance every time he tells the story. So he was very upset. And to make a long story short, he attended this because he felt he paid for it. And as a consequence, he was really moved and changed. It was sort of like, was it St. Paul, where he's hit by lightning and falls off the horse and now has a whole different attitude on Christians and Christianity. He's been struck by lightning. That's a metaphor that's often used out there in the world. And he couldn't view his work the same way anymore. He couldn't view his kids the same way anymore. His wife, he couldn't view the same. He thought they were very superficial. I mean, his own contribution to that scenario is a whole other story. But he suddenly, it's like the membrane was ripped from his eyes. And he's now looking at the same set of facts, the same information, the same situation, and he's seeing and perceiving it an entirely different way. And hopefully for most of us, that's not how these things happen, that we are able to have our aha moments, perhaps in doses, perhaps gently in different scenarios and situations, and not by having a bolt of lightning hit him. So I use that example in my introduction. And the first chapter really deals with this whole idea of our potentials, of working from the inside out, of how we are really not trained to do that. This is not to blame parents or teachers or peers about that they've done something wrong in trying to raise us, because they haven't. They're, for the most part, I mean, we're talking in gross generalities, and everything I'm saying has its exceptions. So please don't take anything as meant to be the final word, because so much of what we're learning in this world is fluid. Our parents try to get us on the right track. They try to teach us what to expect in the world, what to prepare for, sit up straight, listen to your teachers, learn, get good grades, get a job, go get married, have a family. These are the kinds of things. And of course, there are many exceptions. In this day and age, there certainly have been many exceptions. And the world is being treated a little bit differently than it was in previous generations, as far as that's concerned. Curriculums have changed. There is a lot more room for the use of creativity, of imagination, of emotional intelligence, of features and factors of our personality, our characters, and our natures that were not really allowed space before. There's more of that being done. But if you were a product of the history that I speak of, where a lot of that was kind of like, he's having that imaginary friend again. Got to talk to him about this. got to get him back to present. Pay attention, sit here, look here, do this, become this, learn this. And a lot of that internal, intuitive, and subjective awareness capability starts to kind of fade or get put to the side or kind of kicked to the curb. And later on in life, we find that it might not be a bad idea to have that pull into the picture, not because it should take over entirely. The rational, and goodness knows as an attorney, I can tell you the rational is something that is a way of life for many of us who work in a variety of professions, not just the law. It's an important cornerstone to have the reasoning of from this to that, therefore an answer, a result. It's an important feature in the structure of our lives, in the structure of our society, in the structure of our country. But the truth is that we really need something more there than just the rational, because frankly, using just the rational approach can lead to very illogical answers. If you go from this to that, therefore that. And I'm not going to take time now. We only have so much time. I'm not going to go into some of that. But this is what I discuss in the first section. And how we started to get off on this road, on our own Tin Man road, may now mean that we need to take a different road, or we need to take a different fork in that road. And we need to explore other aspects of ourselves and not just be working with the externals. So there are a lot of different chapters that deal with aspects of learning and experience, and some of them are humorous, some of them are more serious, but that's the part one. The second part of this part one is that self-trust is something that also kind of gets lost in this feature of learning from the outside in. Self-trust is something that's a cornerstone of success, of resilience, of many different aspects of our life. And yet there are people who do not have a very strong sense of self-trust. I've worked with some very powerful people, and actually for one person, and I will not name that person, amazingly powerful individual. This was back in the broadcast industry, incredibly insecure about a lot of things. And I'm going to give you a story now, which I tell in the book. It's a quick story about a man who had confidence in him, trusted himself, trusted in what he knew from within himself and what knowledge he had that was rational and creative. And he put it all together and he saved a life. This is not something anybody else should be doing. And every now and then people tell me, oh yes, I've heard this story. So this is about a man standing on a platform, the subway, which is above ground in parts of Washington, D.C. And I think this was on the Maryland side on a Monday morning. And he was standing there along with everyone else, and the train is coming in. They used to come in very, very rapidly. They have changed that policy and are now coming in much more slowly. But the train was you could see it coming. It was just going to be there in not too many seconds. And somebody falls down onto the track. A man falls down onto the track. And he didn't hit the third rail, thank goodness, or he would have been dead at that point. But he was lying a little bit diagonally over the two rails. And everybody, of course, is screaming and shouting and not knowing what to do with this man who's lying there seemingly unconscious on the track, because there's no time to really jump down, try and pull him up, get him up on the platform. That would have been a great solution. There was just no time for that. So this one man who had some kind of mechanical background is standing there and he's thinking, and it just all happened very quickly. And the reason I know what he was thinking is there was one of the news shows actually let him explain the story of what went through his head. Often they ask questions, but because the news piece needs to be the sound bite needs to be very, very, very small, they don't even get to a lot of the answers that we were all looking for. This particular time he was actually allowed to answer. And he said, well, first I just had this thought that I can save this man's life. And you might think, okay, well, that's a really irrational thought, because where's the rationale? Well, it's true. It's not a rational thought, but it's not irrational. It's irrational. We don't see any rational underpinning to this thought. There's just a conclusory thought. I can save this man. The next thing that came through was his technical background that he had. And he realized that there was an arc to the undercarriage, and there were stones and pebbles under the tracks themselves, because the tracks weren't running in the center of town where there's concrete. These were stones and pebbles, so there was some give there. And so that was his rational analysis that kicked in. And thirdly, in came the creativity. Thirdly, he thought, well, I'm small, he's small. If I jump down, pull him straight, lie on top of him, the train will run over both of us and nobody will die. And that's really quite interesting for him to go through that process, but that's exactly what he did in a matter of seconds. It looked like he was reacting, but he was actually responding, because this had actually run through his brain and he knew he could save this man. So that's exactly what he did. And he did save the man. Now, we always like to think that we have the solutions in a purely rational manner. If you thought it through rationally, that's the answer. But often we eliminate opportunities and possibilities and solutions to the decision-making that we have among the choices that we are looking at, because of not being able to trust ourselves. I have a couple of stories in there which are kind of fun, and they have to do with animals. Animals don't go through this. They don't sit there and go, I don't know if I should be doing this. Man's science hasn't yet gotten to the point where they believe that we're capable of coming to this kind of a conclusion. Maybe I should sit this solution out. I won't save his life. I'll just stay where I am. The reason I say this is there's a funny story I recently saw on YouTube. And it's not in the book, but it's along the veins of something I do have in the book. And it's about a man who fell in his bathroom, and he was there lying on the floor. He was an 84-year-old man lying on the floor for ages. It was on a news piece. And he finally decided to, whether he heard the phone ring and that made him think of the phone or not, I'm not exactly sure. But he said to his little cat, a little young cat that was spent the time by him, he said, Fluffy, and I believe his name was Fluffy, ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling, or something like that. He made the sound of the phone and repeated that 2 or 3 times to Fluffy. And what did Fluffy do? Fluffy went and got the phone off the counter and brought it to the guy and put it in his hand. Now, that's a wild story, but this man cried as he told the story and said that his life was saved by his cat because his cat got the message that he needed the phone and brought it to him. The cat didn't question. Should I do this? Should I not do this? Is it a good idea? Yes, they're generally working on instincts. Yes, we are now hearing there is a study of the intuitive process of animals, because we're learning that not everything is instinct. But we're also seeing in the evidence day to day that they don't question their actions half as much as we do. And I do a little piece on them. Ultimately, self-trust is something that we really need to work with and work on. It's a recurring theme in the book, because if our objective is success, if our objective is peace and contentment and resilience, self-trust is right there as a corner pillar. In the second part of the book, I talk about strategies. I'm going to read a little bit of the table of contents. I'm not going to go into all the stories about it. I'm just going to tell you there are ideas of negotiating the path, resourcefulness and resilience, using the intuitive, the creative, and the rational together. I talk about this. I present some ideas on it. How do I just do it? How do I just get it done? How do I bring myself to that point? Deepening our conscious perception. Is it a myth, legend, or reality? These are some of the topics in my second part. They're all strategies and ideas which are perhaps of interest to those who are in that exploratory phase of wanting to look at things a different way, of wanting to shift the kaleidoscope. All the pieces are there, but to move them into a different perspective and see if we can learn a little bit more. And the third part is life happening. It's kind of my favorite part, because this is where I actually talk about the situations that we get in. And I deliberately use fairly dramatic situations. There are a couple of situations that are silly and kind of, well, not entirely silly, but have some humor to them. And there are several that are actually much more challenging. And these are examples of people overcoming triumphs, tragedies, in some instances. And one of the very important tools that keep showing up in how they do respond to these triumphs and tragedies involves kind of what I consider stop, perceive, respond. Again, this is the less on the reaction and more on the response. Very often you will hear companies reacted to this event in the stock market, or here, there, or somewhere, or companies do that. Countries reacted to such and such and such and such. You know, if you'll notice, very often when there's been a reaction, and sometimes there needs to be, sometimes you have to get out of the way of something, or sometimes you have to make sure that you don't tumble and fall off the edge of something, whether that's a metaphor or in real life, there has to be a reaction. But very often, rather than reacting, a response is what was really needed. And as we've seen with this gentleman on the platform, a response doesn't have to be days and weeks and months. Depends how complex the issue is. The problem, of course, I'm simplifying here. But very often, a response is something that you can go through very quickly in your mind. The mind works quickly, but you give yourself that moment, that breath, that pause of stepping back, and are therefore able to take a better view of what is actually going on and what you actually have to do. The man in the story that I've just talked about very much responded, even though it looked like a reaction. Many people standing on the platform were sitting or standing on the platform, probably thought, oh my God, this man's going to die. He's jumping off the thing, he's going to die. But he very quickly had it. He had it, he knew it, and he took care of it. Reacting and responding. Another thing I want to mention, one other example very quickly about the whole idea of reaction. And what I said about companies reacting is that there often needs to be a correction. Whenever there's a reaction, there often needs to be a correction. The same thing with companies, the same thing with countries. I was in a situation where a friend of mine was driving. We were in Los Angeles. We were heading down just the beginnings of an off-ramp, which was quite lengthy, but it was a backed up off-ramp. And there was somebody behind us who sort of didn't realize that. And my friend, I could see his eyes just go wide as I was talking to him. And I looked back and I could see this car flying at freeway speed. And we were basically stopped at that point. It was going to be a huge smash up. And interestingly enough, the man in the car realized before he hit us that we were stopped. So what did he do? He turned the car and flew over two different lanes into a third lane and somehow did not hit anybody. It was a busy day on the freeway. I don't know how he managed not to hit anyone, but he did not hit anyone. And then he overcorrected and flew to the right 2 lanes into that first primary lane, and then corrected again and ended up in the central lane and continued. He was driving all during this, but the flying back and forth we could see because he had essentially lost control of his car when he veered off of the ramp so that he could save his life and our lives. So that's an example of having to react and also subsequently having to correct, because very often reactions do involve correction of some kind. And there's a very interesting story that I do tell, and I want to share it here about a man and his, in his case, not a reaction. This is an example of a good response. This story was in the paper, and this was a man who was in a Japanese labor camp after the war and was there for a couple of years. Everybody had given him up for dead. Everybody around him was dying. He was surviving on a cup of rice a day. His back was broken. He'd been tortured. His fingers were broken. He had been a dentist, actually. His eyesight was ruined. His own teeth fell out for the most part. As I say, he was just broken to bits. And yet he managed to survive. Yet he managed to have hope. Yet he managed to think towards the possibilities of the future. And I love this story because he comes back, and of course his family's gone. They've moved on. This is a wreck of a man. They don't know this man. And his home is gone. His family is gone. He has some money coming from, I guess, from the government for having been in this, served his country. And he went to the doctor. They looked at him and they said, and this is several doctors. I mean, his organs were all ruined, and the man was a shell of a human at this point. And they said, look, do everything you like and want now in life. Go ahead, enjoy yourself. We really don't give you more than a few months. And we don't see how your body can hold out. Well, P.S., this guy ended up living into his 90s, and that's how this story was told. This was a flashback to how he came back and reclaimed his life. Now, did it straighten his back? Did it fix him? I'm sure there were some cosmetic things that could have been done. I'm sure he worked on helping to support his organs. He probably was put on nutrition. I don't know all of that. That wasn't part of the story. But the bottom line was he wasn't that vigorous, young, healthy, educated, accomplished professional anymore. He had to reinvent himself. And what did he do? What did the man do? He decided that he had a little bit of money. He's going to take classes in real estate. So he ended up selling all sorts of homes in Hollywood and all over the place. He made loads of new friends, and he managed to create some kind of life for himself. Now, of course, we don't know what that life consisted of. It may not have been the conventional one of getting remarried, having a new family. I don't know that any of that ever did happen. But from the way that his voice was heard in this piece, it seemed like he found some joy even in his life, given all these horrible things that had happened to him. So this is just one of the examples of the kind of resilience that can come from making the critical decisions that you're going to survive this, that you're going to make this through. Now, does that guarantee survival? Does that guarantee a happy ending? There are no guarantees, as many of us know in life, about any of this. But the more we can position ourselves into a place. I mean, he used his imagination. He talked about some of that. I can't go into all of it here now. There's no time for that. But he talked about a bit about all of that. And he clearly did what he needed to do to create the possibilities in his own mind, if nowhere else. The possibilities were still there. And even when he left and everything looked hopeless, he still had the possibilities in his mind, and he decided to make one of them come true. He's going to be a realtor. And he was a very, very successful realtor. So that's kind of what I go through in this chapter. I talk a little bit about my family. I talk about what they went through. I talk about how this has affected me and how it has put me in a place of inherited resilience, if you will, because when you grow up with these kinds of stories and this kind of history. And I also mentioned that you know, if we look around for it, there are many, many of these kinds of stories in our lives. There are many of these people and family ancestry, if you will, where people have been through all sorts of challenges and overcome them. And somehow we wouldn't be here if we didn't have them. And, you know, if we don't have them in our family, or we don't know who our families really are, we didn't get to know them, they passed away, or whatever the circumstances were. There are stories, as I have seen and as I love to collect, out in the world, out on the internet, out and among other people, that we can really draw from and draw upon and be inspired by. And so that's a little bit of what I do discuss. There's much more going on in that section, but that's a little bit of it. And my last section that I deal with in the book has more to do with practical applications. I talk about some things with business, issues that deal with business, part 4. And this one, here I talk about resolutions that we make and whether we keep them professional and personal. And I talk about what decision strategy innovation is with greater depth. I talk about setting your business apart from competition. I talk about creative marketing. I talk about winning. Is it always such a good deal? Do you always want to win? For example, I remember when I was doing negotiations work with the airline, I had one situation, and I have to say this didn't really come up much because I was very happy to work with give and take. I knew where my boundaries were. My supervising counsel considered me a pretty tough negotiator, but that was just because I knew how much we could give. High risk, high yield potentials. You can risk a little more if you know you're going to get a lot more out of it. If the potentials are a one-time only or one-off situation, you're not going to sort of give away all of your protections for your risk factors in a contract. And so this one man and I were attempting to negotiate. That's the best way I can call it. But the truth is, he really didn't want to negotiate. He just wanted to bully me into a position that would be advantageous to him. He just wanted, literally, he wanted it all his own way. And that's not a negotiation, first of all. And second of all, no, there was no way I was going to give away, give away the ranch, so to speak, just because this man is attempting an intimidation tactic. So that was not going to work. And he was definitely not going to budge. So if he wasn't going to budge and I didn't want to give it all away, we weren't able to come to terms. And that was a very rare situation, but one where what would have been winning in that? If I'd have gotten some kind of deal, it would have been at a potential loss. It would have been at a potential loss to the company. And so, okay, great. We came to a deal here. And then once examined, it was clear that it would be not only largely, almost entirely to the benefit of the other side. And that's not really winning. The best winning, as we all know, is win-win, when both sides are able to get aspects that are beneficial to them, and what they end up having to sacrifice or perhaps do not have as protected in the agreement is something that they're not going to necessarily suffer that much of a loss. You structure these things, you work with both sides in order to have something which will be useful, something that you can go forward with. You can have a recurring agreement. You can have because even if you do, let's say you're the one trying to strong arm the other person, at the very least, it's going to be a one-off. No one's going to want to return to you and keep working on those terms. You don't build longevity, you don't build trust, you don't build confidence in the other side, you don't build the relationship that will keep you moving forward. So that's part of what I discuss in here. Some of the different points that one engages and encounters in a business context. And at what point do you look to other businesses for assistance? How do you work with collaboration? Is collaboration an opportunity for you? That and other other things are brought up in here that are points of interest from a business perspective. And yes, jealousy is another interesting point that I do touch upon. How toxic jealousy can be. Jealousy is an emotion. I don't talk a lot about emotion, and in the same way that I don't discuss the psychology of what is going on. I discuss the sort of the impact perhaps of psychology and how people are behaving and interacting with one another. But I'm not a psychologist, and I think psychology is a very, very valuable tool, very important, very useful for people. If they've never had a chance to self-examine, I bring up some points in the book, but if things are not, if things are sort of coming to a head and you feel confused and you feel that neither way looks good. And I've actually had situations like this with clients in the past where I'm talking to them, we're discussing the options. The options are there. And actually there's one option that looks really good, which of course I can't make that decision for them. I'm not here to decide for them. I'm here to facilitate all of this. And they're still so confused. And I have on occasion here and there suggested some additional guidance, some help from outside. And it doesn't have to be psychological help. Sometimes it's help in perspective, in talking to others who are in similar positions in similar work, where we get so competitive sometimes we forget that collaboration can sometimes be an amazing resource. And I talk about that a little bit in the book as well. So that pretty much covers the direction that this book takes in the Tin Man finding his brain and exploring some of the challenges that he that he encounters, and coming to the conclusion. I want to just read a couple of other little points to kind of wrap everything up. And this is in my afterword. The power of our decision making needs to be fueled by our understanding. And our understanding can only be arrived at through integrating information and insight. This combo most often results in our acting not only from a position of strength, but one of wisdom, and amazing things can happen. The most important thing to remember here is that if a particular outcome is within our integrity, meaning it is within our capability to begin with, we can do it. Doesn't mean we will do it, but we can do it. With our vision on our goals and our focus on our purposefulness, along with the effective action in decision-making in the present, we can do this. And that's the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? We have a little bit of time. We have like 14 minutes here. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask or something they would like to contribute or share? Nobody? Nobody has any points of their own interest that they would like to bring forward? Adam, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dani.
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to, if someone's going to come up with a question or a thought that they would like to share or contribute, that would be
Hi,
fantastic.
Dani. I
Yeah.
do have a thought. It's Angel.
Okay. Hi, Angel.
Hello. Hi. I love the idea of the Tin Man, and I am just really wondering whether it wouldn't be great to think about expanding to the other main characters as well, talking about the heart and talking about courage and those things that are also themes of the famous book. And I, for one, would love to see it as an undercurrent for your upcoming work.
Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because that sort of has been under consideration for me. I do intend to make the Tin Man part of a trilogy. I want to take a little time after having done this book to sort of take a little space, see the response to it, see what people think, what ideas they have, and just as you're sharing here, that's a very, would be an interesting way to go. I'm sort of very mindful in this next book of wanting to be more specifically focused. This one is a collection of essays and commentaries, as I've said, and it doesn't focus as narrowly or as deeply on any of them. It's written more in the voice of stimulating insight and idea, and story, and that. But as you suggest, if I did work that way with it, to try to get the other characters in, I would probably be focusing more specifically. And that's an interesting idea, definitely one for me to think about.
Thank you. That sounds really helpful. I would love to see that. And yes, this is the introduction, I guess, and
Yes.
you'll dig in deeper. I think some specifics would be very helpful for a lot of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to end the meeting if no one else has any questions. Thank you, Danute.
Thank you.
All right, good night, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.
Excellent job, Dani.